Okay. Kairos question is that what is advantage of triples over quadruples? Let's go back. So triples essentially is to reduce the storage that we have for different expressions. That is the only, yeah. So if you use, yeah, if you have to use indirect triples, then there is no advantage of using triples over quadruples. Um, that is proposed because in case you already have triples representation in your IR, then to make it work for reordering instructions, you can use indirect triples. There is more for software maintenance perspective. But if you want to go from quadruples to triples, the advantage was that we could reduce the amount of storage that we might have. Because for very large programs, the amount of IR that you might generate will turn out to be large. And it's not only the IR information, there is a lot of other information with respect to your program which might be getting used, which requires a lot of memory. And as I was mentioning, compilation is a heavy process both for CPU as well as memory. Yes, triples are advantageous if the instructions, you don't have to worry about the reordering in this phase. But yeah, typically nowadays you will require some sort of reordering. So triples may not be the best way to do it unless you use indirect triples. All right. So we'll continue our discussion on IR. So we were looking at register allocation, and for this particular piece of code, you guys told me that you can do it possibly in 3 registers and so on. So I did a very naive register allocation where I just gave 1 register to everybody, and that gave me 7 register requirement. But that might not be always suitable. Plus, from efficiency perspective, it's a good idea to reduce the number of registers that you use, so that those are available for other purposes. There were some observations which we made here, and accordingly we rewrote these expressions by giving them some sort of number which shows that these are different variables. For example, every definition becomes a new variable. And if we try to do that, then with respect to the new set of statements that I have, I would like to perform register allocation. So let's try to do that, and that I am showing on the right hand side. So let's see. So definitely for A and B, I require to, sorry. Are you able to see the screen, or it's gone? So can somebody confirm that you are able to, it's stuck? Okay, let me. Right, so it should come up now. So I'm showing you the register allocation on the right hand side. So definitely for A and B, we do require 2 registers, right? Assuming that the operations are usually performed on the registers. There exist CISC instructions where you might have one variable inside a register, another variable inside memory, and so on. For our purpose at this level, we will just worry about the that all the operations need to be performed except for load and store onto the registers. So A and B do require registers. So I need 2 registers, R1 and R2. That seems to be fine. Now for P1, I don't require, okay, I will require a 3rd register provided A and B are used later. That means the use of R1 and R2 exists later in the program. Later in the program, I don't see anything with respect to A and B. Not the definition, but the use of A and B. And therefore, I can reuse one of those registers. And therefore, I decide that for P1, I'm going to use R1. After this, so at this stage, R1 is used, but R2 is free because there is no further use of B. And therefore for for C, which is the second expression, so for P1 and C, I require register. So P1 is in R1, so I can give R2 to C, right? So that is what is happening here. At this stage, I am going to go to the assignment of P1 minus C to Q1. Q1 can be given R1 or R2 depending upon if P1 and C are not getting used further. P1 is getting redefined, so definitely that is not getting used. C is also not used further in any of the other expressions, and therefore I can give R1 or R2 to Q1. I decide to use the first register, let's say R1. So that happens here. After this, I need Q1, which is there in R1, and I also need D, so that goes into R2. Right? And then P2, I can reuse R1 or R2 depending upon whether Q1 and D are used further or not. It turns out that Q1 is used later, so I don't want to remove Q1 from the register, and therefore I'll keep it in R1, but D is not used, and therefore I'll assign R2 to P2. That is happening here. This is R2 being assigned to P2. P2 gets used in R2 and then E is required. However, Q1 is now in R1 and it has some use in future, and therefore I require a third register, which is R3. Right? So this is important that if there is further use of a particular register, then you have to hold on to that register. So that is one way in which you can count the number of registers required. There are other ways, but we'll discuss that. Right? So there is, so let's complete this. So E and P2, so R3 and R2 are the ones that get used, and then P3 is the one that is to be assigned some register. Now again, E is not used further, so I can give R3 to it, but P2 is also not getting used further, and therefore I can assign R2 also. So R2 or R3 I can assign to P3. R1 I cannot assign because Q1 still is there in R1. So let's say I decide to give R2 to P3, and then that P3 I use in the next instruction, and then Q1 is already in R1, and then for Q2 I can use any of these R1, R2, R3, assuming that there are no further uses of P3 and Q1. Right? So that, let's say, goes into R1. Right? Does anybody have any questions on this particular way of register allocation? Okay, so that's better, that from 7 registers we came back to 3, and this way of representing a program, representing an intermediate representation, where we have a different definition or different variable for each definition of a variable, is called as a static single assignment form. Right? So there is per let's say variable, there is a single definition. The variable might get used multiple times. For example, Q1 is used here as well as here. So there could be lots of different uses, but as far as definition is concerned, there is only single definition. And that is called as a static single assignment. Why is it called a, so single assignment is, I understand. Why is it called a static single assignment? Done at compile time. Okay. Yeah, more or less true. In fact, it's related. So static means that there is a single source level definition that we are talking about. At runtime, this single definition might not be single definition. There will be dynamic instances of this particular assignment. For example, if it is inside a loop or inside a function which is inside a loop or recursion and so on. So therefore, there will be multiple instances of this P1, Q1, P2, P3, etc. But as far as compile time is concerned, that is static. So as we were discussing sometimes, static versus dynamic meaning. In this case, it means that it is happening at the source code. I am able to pinpoint that this is the line at which this particular variable exists. It might actually refer to multiple instances at runtime. Therefore, this is a static definition. Okay, the next question here is that can R3 be avoided? Any suggestions? So can we just use R1 and R2 to take care of this particular program? Okay. So Cairo says that we might be able to spill the register to main memory. Right? So we can free up a register. So we held on to R1 for Q1, but we could have actually reused R1 by spilling Q1 to memory, right? And then performing the operation. So one thing which is okay, so I'll come to that. So that is called as a register spilling. And then I could have avoided using R3, and I could have done with R1 and R2 only. Can I avoid R2? I mean, can I avoid using two registers? Can I use only one register? Right. Yeah, there are other ways in which you can reduce the amount of number of registers. You can rewrite the instructions, rewrite the program such that the register pressure gets reduced. It's called as register pressure, which means the number of registers that you require. Okay, so Venkat says that no, we cannot reduce from 2 to 1 because we need two operands, right? So that is where the instruction set architecture comes into picture, where the architecture demands that for these instructions to be executed, I need minimum these registers, and the maximum number of registers required across all the instructions is going to be the minimum number of registers that your architecture must have. In this case, we are saying that we require R1 and R2 two registers for performing a plus or a minus and so on, and therefore minimum we require two registers. We cannot go back to one. Okay, so that sounds good. So one thing which, although I showed you a piece of code and the register that gets allocated, yeah, I'll come to Shirisha's question. There is one thing which is missing from the code that I showed you. Right? So for this particular code to be equivalent to what you would have possibly otherwise done, this register allocation alone is insufficient. There is something more which is required. What is that? So if I perform these operations using these registers, that alone is insufficient. What is also required is that I need to move back the final data into the memory. Right? That we never discussed. We just said that, okay, I can perform these operand plus, minus, star into the using the registers, but I never wrote back to variables p and q. Right? That needs to be done, and therefore you require a store instruction at the end of this number crunching operations plus and minus using registers. So at the end of all of this instructions, there should be a store of, let's say, Q2 is stored in R1, so there will be store R1 in Q, right? This instruction needs to be added. Then I need to write back to P3 to the location of P. So I should be able to say store R2 in P. Right? So that is, those two instructions need to be added. Yeah, as well as loading the values from memory. That is also correct. That I need to load the values. But I am assuming that as soon as I say that a particular register gets used for this thing, then those load instructions also will be added. Good.
Sir,
Let's come back to Shrisha's question. That
sir,
isn't spilling worth it only if we run out of registers. Right? So that is in general true. In fact, uh, it is encouraged that you should have maximum utilization of registers, maximum utilization of the lower levels of memory as much as possible before going to the next level. So therefore, according to that, since registers are closer than the cache, we will say that you should have maximum usage of registers as much as possible. Only when you run out of them, you should utilize registers. It was more like for our thought exercise that can we reduce the number of registers. But otherwise, leaving them unused doesn't make sense. You should use them.
sir.
Venkat, just a minute. Huh?
Yes, go on.
Sir, like when we are having these load store instructions, like won't we also require some register to store the address of P and Q? Like we aren't counting those things right now.
Uh, no,
Like
typically,
where are we maintaining the addresses required for P, Q, and all these things which are loading from the memory?
right. So I mean, we are not, I mean, although we are discussing it in the context of intermediate representation, this whole discussion will again come back. This whole discussion will come back to when we come to code generation. But in the code generation, we are going to have variables on stack and variables in the heap. If a variable is on the stack, then with respect to the stack pointer, it will have some offset at which we'll be able to load from, right? And with respect to the heap, that is anyway going to get stored in a temporary when you have some sort of malloc, or internally it might have an sbrk system call and so on. So that return address has to be also stored inside the register. So in that case, we will require some sort of indirect register allocation also. So you are right that you will require some sort of register if you want to load from memory. But if it is only a stack pointer related thing, that can possibly be loaded directly if your instruction supports. Okay, so I'll also mention one thing. There are instructions where you can specify a mnemonic at the assembly code itself, which means that I can say load a comma r1, in which case I can actually specify the mnemonic a, which might refer to a particular memory location. However, so that means that the assembly code itself understands these variable names. Right? So that is possible. If that is not possible, then typically we have some label associated with these, let's say, strings and variables and so on. And those labels we can utilize to push the address into one register, and then I might be able to do an indirection where indirect addressing mode, essentially pointers get used to load from that particular register. Right? So both of these are possible. It depends upon our ISA. Typically in the x86 architecture, you will be able to use the mnemonics.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Any other questions?
So, although I said that maximizing the usage of registers is a good thing to do, it's not as simple as that. The reason being that while you would like to maximize the usage of registers, you are not sure which variables to push into them and which variables to spill. Typically, you might have a very few registers, but your number of variables which you want to push into registers might be sufficiently larger. In which case, you need to perform some sort of cost benefit analysis to figure out that putting these particular variables into registers is going to be beneficial, and then I can have some sort of spilling in between and then load other registers. So there is some cost involved in spinning. There is some benefit because of using the registers, pushing the variables into registers. This cost benefit analysis in general is a hard problem. That means that it will require exponential amount of time to get the optimal answer. But you can get a reasonably good approximation factor with respect to this overall cost of executing these instructions, right? So that we are still going to study a little bit towards code generation, but I wanted to mention this to you. Can we remove instructions which store a value to a variable which is never going to be used? Yes, if your compiler, if your optimization pass can figure out that this particular variable is no longer going to get used. For example, in our case, if Q2 is not getting used further at all, then there is no need to push that register R2 into the location Q2, right? You can actually avoid it. So that is, yeah, so as Cairo says, that is kind of a dead code. Dead code is slightly different. Yeah, so you guys are getting into a little bit of program analysis here. So the compiler needs to know, as we will discuss a little bit of optimizations, we will come to know a little bit about this part. But essentially the compiler needs to know the context, the complete context where that variable might get used. And there are lots of different ways in which that can be done. For example, if there are local variables within a function, those are not going to be available outside the function. And therefore you can guarantee that, okay, if this variable after this point within this function is not getting used, then it is never going to get used inside the program. However, if there are global variables or static variables or heap variables, then you need to worry about this code. So dead code is with respect to the instructions that never get executed. Dead code is the code which is dead, which is not reachable from the first instruction in main, right? Irrespective of what input you give. Whereas what Shrisha was talking about was the variables which are not going to get used at all. So it might not be a dead code. There may not be any dead code, but the variable doesn't get used at all. Right? So that is to say that it's a dead variable rather than a dead code. Okay, can the programmer specify some variables that must be in registers like C allows using register queue? Is it a good idea? Okay, so this is a good question. So when C started at that time, I mean, this is more for historical reasons that register keyword was used. It still is used, but compilers more or less ignore it these days. So at that time it was okay, the programs were small and the compilers were small, there wasn't too much optimization that was happening at that time, but things have evolved so much now that compilers are intelligent enough to figure out that which variables are really important. And it's not always a good idea to use register keyword. Anyway, it is a hint to the compiler, it's not a compulsory thing. But more often than not, it turns out that the variables that we specify at the source code level are not the ones that actually get pushed into the register. It's possible that there will be some manipulation of that. For example, if I say that I am referring to a particular variable, let's say some x or a of I or something like that. And I want to push that into a register, so I'll say register int x or something like that. But it's possible that in the intermediate representation or the final code generation, there might be a lot of temporaries that you might generate, and some of that temporary might be the actual one which gets repeatedly used. So it's better to leave this to the compiler rather than taking a decision ourselves at the programmer level. Therefore, it's usually recommended these days not to worry about this register register keyword unless you are actually writing a very low level code. So you are writing some embedded software where you have precise control over what instructions you have, and then you are using some sort of ASM, I mean assembly instructions in your C code or Fortran code, and that is helping you to push, okay, these registers are likely to be used for these variables, this register is free, and therefore I can make use of this by pushing this particular variable into a register. If you have that much control, almost working at the assembly level, then it makes sense to use register keyword. Okay, but otherwise for our usual programs, whatever you are going to code inside your companies, you don't require using register keyword. Compilers are good enough to figure out what instructions and what variables are more often used, so rely on those. Just use O1, O2, O3 and that should be sufficient. Okay, so there is some discussion about register keyword being deprecated or still available. Okay, I think it is still there. I don't think they have deprecated. Okay, so any other concerns? Is register done completely at this? No. Register allocation is not done at this stage. I am showing you here. The reason being I wanted to get to this static single assignment, but register allocation is not done here because we are at the IR level. At the IR level, you don't know anything about the machine. So it will get done only at the code generation level, not at this stage. But I thought that the discussion is interesting enough, so I just went ahead with that. Okay. So we'll move ahead from here. So static single assignment is an intermediate representation and just says that every definition refers to a different variable. And that SSA, although we did it for a simple code like 5 instructions where there is no branching, etc. Well, in general, you will have branches. And now, for example, if the statement after y, after this if else statement is y equal to x into a, which x this particular definition of y refers to, right? So, can somebody tell me? So if you try to convert this into SSA form, you will say x1 equal to -1 and x2 equal to -1, x2 equal to 1 in the else part. So now there are two variables and there is a variable x getting used. So should it be x1 or x2? You've seen till now x2, x1. Okay. So can you guys explain why it should be so? I'll ask Venkat first. Why should it be x2? Because that is the last definition, or? Okay. Cairo, why it should be x1? Meaning? I didn't understand. No braces in else meaning? Oh, okay. Okay. All right. So, yeah, this is a little bit of problem. The reason being that I have not shown you what is the code before if, and we don't know if the flag is going to be true or not. In fact, flag could be dependent on the input, right? In which case the compile time you are not able to figure out whether it's going to be x1 or x2. And compilers, as we discussed in the first or second class, that they need to perform the task in the correct manner. That is, the semantics of the original program must be maintained when you run the code, right? So, and that needs to be satisfied at every stage, at the AST stage, at the IR stage, at the assembly stage, at the final machine level code generation stage. Yeah, so as Nishit says, it can't be done statically. You cannot figure out whether it is going to be x1 or x2. And therefore you will say that the y equal to x into a is going to refer to either x1 or x2. I don't know which one. If the compiler can figure out that flag is always going to be non-zero, then you can say that it is going to be x1. But then in that case, it turns out to be an optimization. X equal to 1 will turn out to be a dead code. You can remove the else part. You can remove even if flag. You just have x equal to -1 there. And then you can use x1 equal to -1 and then you can use x1 there. Or if you can figure out that flag is always 0, you can remove the else part. you can remove the if part, right? So all of these optimizations are possible, but in general you are not able to figure out what it is, and therefore SSA kind of involves sort of a phi function. What it says is that it could be either x1 or x2, right? So that phi function says that I am going to have a new definition of x, which is going to be x3, which is either x1 or x2. So phi is a selection operator, and accordingly then x3 gets used further, right? So this is more like yeah, so this is currently the only sane way of doing in general when you don't know anything about whether x1 or x2 is going to get executed. Yeah, so this phi function is what you will, and in general, in this case, we just require two variables, but you might require multiple instances of these. For example, if you have a large switch case and after that there is some use of a variable, then all those switch case variables need to be added to this phi function. Note that this phi function exists only at the IR. It is not a real code that is going to get generated, because in the real code you don't require this x1 and x2. It's the same memory location x, right? And therefore you don't require this selection. This selection is more like a mnemonic just for IR to understand that it's one of them. That's it, right? So it's a fictitious addition that we have done here. Any questions on the phi function? Otherwise, I might ask you to do it for a loop. Okay. So the control flow of this particular program is going to be that depending upon the value of flag, right? This is more like a what you call as the algorithms are specified using I'm forgetting the name. What is that called? Flowchart. Yes, thanks. Yeah, so this is more like a flowchart, and this is definitely a flow of the program, and you can go either to if part or the else part, and then they merge here, and then y equal to x into a gets executed. So this particular flowchart kind of diagram is essentially going to be getting used later when we look at the control flow graph. So the control flow in the program can be specified using this flowchart kind of diagram, although we will not have different kinds of blocks like we have decision block, input output block, and assignment statement block. We'll have all of them as, let's say, basic blocks. Okay, so yeah, so this is how the pictorially you will see that the control happens like this. So a phi node is an abstract node, it's not a real entity. And it's also an idempotent operator, which means that if you have phi of x1, 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 x2, it is same as phi of x1, x2. Right? That's what it means. Okay. Any questions on this phi node further?
Sir?
I have asked that question. Okay. Venkat has a question.
Sir, I wanted to ask, like, what is the output of this IR generation? Like, what are we, like, we are having a, like, sometimes we are saying we have instructions, like we make it into three code or two code, and sometimes we're saying that we'll make a flow chart. Like, what are we finally trying to achieve through the IR? Like, what will be the output?
Sure. So IR is going to have your instructions in his 3 address code or 2 address code format, right? That is going to be the instructions available. However, that alone does not give you all the information about the structure of the program. I mean, it will give, I mean, you can derive it, but you would want to derive it. So this control flow graph that, I mean, this is not really a, I mean, okay, we'll for now assume that it is a control flow graph. This control flow graph is going to contain different blocks of code, and each block of code is going to contain your intermediate representation of that particular block, right? So that we are going to study soon, but intermediate representation, you can assume, contains just a sequence of 3 address code statements, right? So it's like another program converted from your source code into a 3 address code, right? So that's what you can assume for now.
Sir, so
Uh,
how do sir?
Yeah, go ahead.
So,
Yeah.
like, so what is so how do we encode this 5 into 3 address code?
Uh, okay, that's a good question. So phi is not used in the 3 address code format. It is used in the static single assignment format. So SSA is also one representation of, so like you have 3 address code, 2 address code, 1 address code. Static single assignment is another IR representation, which can have, I mean, which does not have any notion of that it should have multiple, it should have a restriction in terms of the number of variables and so on. Although there have been SSA, which is like can be converted into 3 address code. For example, in this case, you will say that phi of x1 comma x2 is x3. If there is x1, x2, x3 whose phi needs to be taken, then you will split it as 2 phi instructions. Right? So it can get converted, lowered into that form also. SSA can also be used quite close to the source code. What that means is that you can actually refer to a variable, in this case, for example, x, and you can have this if flag, etc., where you replace that x with x1 and the else is x with x2, right? So you can actually convert your source program into another source program which resembles SSA form. However, I mean, that also gets used in some of the compilers for a different purpose. But primarily, your SSA code is going to be referring, I mean, your intermediate representation is going to contain a combination of SSA and 3 address. Right? So you will have 3 address code, which is going to get converted into SSA form by replacing these variables into, let's say, different temporaries. And then phi instructions are going to get used only in the representation, not in the code that you will finally generate. Right? So I don't know if I introduced too many things quickly, but okay. So I'll just summarize this. So you have this source code. That grammar is going to tell you that what is the format of this particular program. Grammar is going to build some sort of a syntax tree out of it, or abstract syntax tree. From the abstract syntax tree, you will perform some checks and so on, which after that you are going to lower to a set of simple instructions. Those set of simple instructions is your intermediate representation. This intermediate representation could be in 3 address code, 2 address code, whatever you decide. At the same time, this is going to get further refined so that it turns out to be in a static single assignment form. Once it is in the static single assignment form, or before that, even before that, that gets done, but most of the compilers first convert it into SSA form and then extract a control flow graph out of this intermediate representation. This control flow graph is going to get used for performing different kinds of analysis over the code. So we are saying that in the IR, we are going to perform lots of different analysis. Those analysis could be that which pointers are pointing to what variables, or whether certain code is dead, or whether certain variables are unused, or whether a particular, let's say, even a complicated part, like if you have fread, then it has to be preceded by fopen. If such an analysis needs to be done, that all this analysis you can do after you have built this control flow graph out of your IR. After you have this control flow graph and you have performed the analysis, using the information that you have captured from this analysis, you will perform transformations, which means essentially the optimizations. So in this case, for example, I might say that, okay, this particular code is dead, so I'm going to remove it, right? That is a transformation, which means that you are changing the IR, changing the code which was already existing, or there is some tail recursion which I'm going to convert into, let's say, iterative form or something like that. So all of these are optimizations which you can do at the IR stage when you have built your control flow graph. Right? And this control flow graph need not be function specific, it can also be across functions. So there will be one control flow graph per function, and there will be links whenever there is a call instruction and from the end of the control flow graph to the return instruction, and so on. So you can build a nice big graph out of this. You perform optimizations, transformations in this control flow graph. From there, once you have the optimized control flow graph, you start generating code. While generating code, you are going to have to do register allocation. What is the ISA? What are the instructions that are required? Using this ISA, I am going to create certain set of instructions, which is going to be essentially your almost assembly code. This assembly code, I'm going to further apply optimizations because now I know the machine architecture. Now I know the instructions that are there inside this machine. Therefore, I can tweak it such that it performs a machine dependent optimizations. From there, I get the final assembly code, which the assembler is going to assemble to a final machine code. That machine code is essentially your .o file. This .o file from different programs or libraries, for example, libc.a and so on, are going to get linked, which means that the binary code, the machine code is going to get linked, and you are going to fill up certain addresses. So the .o file is the relocatable machine code, which means that you are going to use offsets rather than absolute addresses. Offsets with respect to some base. What is that base? I don't know. When you link it, at that time, some more information is going to get captured and you get an executable which is going to be your a.out, which is going to fill up some addresses. For example, I don't know where printf is. When I link it with libc.a, I know the address of libc.a's printf. So I'm going to have a jump to that, which is going to be your address of printf, which is going to get added to your a.out. I mean, essentially the code from .o. This final a.out in ELF format or whatever is the format that you use is going to be your final executable, which finally gets loaded when you run a.out. During loading also, there is some resolving of references required because you are not sure just by looking at a.out where it is going to get loaded in memory. Right? We just assume that the base address is 0 and we just start from there, but the base address might be 4800. So there is some reloading of the base pointer, etc., that gets updated when you load the binary. So that relocation happens. With respect to that base, then the instructions are anyway going to get executed because the instructions are relocatable. There are no absolute addresses. So accordingly, the processor is going to start executing those instructions. Any questions on any of these parts? I mean, thanks Venkat for asking that. But I mean, this overall flow should get clear. Maybe I have never explained this properly, but feel free to ask if you have any questions in this. Okay, so I'm sure that in the OS, you will also hear more about the loading of a binary and setting up the environment of a particular executable, that is the process, right? And then there might be multiple, let's say, execution threads within the same process. So all of this you are probably going to study a little later, or I don't know if you have already studied, but yeah. All righty, so let's move ahead from here. And I want you to do this for a loop now. So you are given this source code. So in your copies, you can try to figure out what are the SSA instructions that are going to be used. So since we are talking more about SSA and not worried about, let's say, 3 address code, you can have the SSA at in the same syntax as the, or almost as the same syntax as this one. But actually you will not require more than 3 addresses in any of these. Okay, so then I think it is going to be equivalent. So you can assume that it is in the IR SSA form you have to convert it to. Each instruction can contain maximum 3 addresses. Just that there won't be any for loop. There will be a label to which you have to use a goto. Right? So you can assume that there is some jump or goto instruction available in the IR. So please write that, and if there are any questions, we can discuss that. And I can get you started. The first statement should be x1 equal to 0.
Maybe I'll continue using this for the rest of the class. There are
So those who finish can write down the SSA form of the last statement in this program, that is x equal to x plus I. What will be the statement? If you can write it down, that will clarify how you have done it for the rest of the code. Okay, so x1 equal to 0, then I1 equal to 0. From there is a condition I1 less than n. You can assume n to be a variable or variable n1 or as a constant, doesn't matter. Then comes this, so this will be x2 equal to x1 plus I, right? So this plus equal to is unlikely to be available at the SSA form. So x2 equal to x1 plus I is what I1 is what we will do. Then I2 equal to I1 plus 1, and then x3 equal to x2 minus 1. Right? So until this part, I think things should be okay. Okay. So Sarthak has written something. Let's see, if others have any other suggestions, please write down. After x3 equal to x2 minus 1, we have to go to plus plus I. So that becomes I3 equal to I2 plus 1. Right? And from there is a jump to this particular instruction. So this should be under some label and then jump to that particular label. Right? Phi of xi and x1. Okay, good. So whatever I explained just now, right, that is necessary, but that is not sufficient to take care of this looping construct. The reason being that when I say that this is going to be I1 less than n, that is true only for the first instance. The I that is going to come here is also going to be possibly 3, right? That is I3 or I1. And therefore, there is a kind of join. There are two values which are flowing into I, and therefore I cannot use only I1 for representing this I. I need a phi instruction there, which is a combination of, which is a selection from I1 and I3. So this I is going to get replaced with a new variable, let's say I4 or whatever, I13, whatever you want to call it. That should be a phi node just before this, and that phi node should get executed before you execute this I less than n. A similar thing is going to happen for the rest of the instructions, because this x2 that we were talking about is not only using x1 plus I1, it is actually using I13, and not only x1 but this x, which was x3. Therefore there should be a phi node corresponding to x also before we enter the loop, or just after entering the loop. That is also okay. Right? Is this point understood? So whatever we did for one iteration of the loop, that is necessary, but it is not sufficient. You have to do multiple iterations and come to some sort of a fixed point with respect to the variable names, right? And once I have these variable names, then I precisely know that this particular x, which is probably going to be x3 or x13, whatever, that is going to get phied with x1 when you come out of this loop. At that time, the phi instruction should make use of this particular value of x, the value of I as well, because the value of I could also be I13 or whatever is the next instruction, next variable that you have created. So you require at least 2 passes over this to come to a steady state of variables that you require in this program for the correct SSA form. One iteration is insufficient. Right? One iteration was fine when you had non-looping constructs like if else and so on, switch case, etc. But when you have looping construct, you yourself will have to iterate to come up with the correct SSA form. Right? So that's what I'm going to show now. So let's go over it in the last minute. I'll just quickly finish this and then we'll stop. So x1, I1 are okay, then there is a label. At this stage, I require a selection. Although in the first iteration, I don't require a selection because there is only I1. Having that phi node doesn't hurt because it is going to just select I1 at that time. But anyway, this is executable execution time, which we don't have to worry about. There is a join happening from 2 because there is go to L1 here. And therefore, I require a phi node. That is as simple as that. So I1 happens here. I13 less than n. For x also there is a phi node, and the rest of the instructions use that particular variable I13 and x13, okay, which get redefined to x2 and x3. So therefore I start using I2 and then I3 and so on, right? And then you go back and the instructions are as before. Even after first iteration, you can just quickly check if for the second iteration, do you have something more? For example, if this is I3 that is getting used here, and the last variable is x, the instance of x is x3, and that is getting taken care of here. There is no x2 that is flowing into this this code, right? Similarly, there is no I2 that is flowing into this code, and therefore, and that makes sense because I2 was this, which is not really visible to this particular I. So that makes sense. So that seems to be that this is the correct code. At the end of the loop, I need to get a phi of whatever is coming from the two sides. What is coming from the two sides? The only way you can come out of this is when this condition is false. When this condition is false, you have I13 and you have x3, right? So x3 is always there. It is not x13. X13 is here. However, there is x1 coming into picture here, and therefore if you had used x13 and x1 as a phi node, that would have been still correct but not technically accurate, because x3 doesn't really flow into x13 doesn't really flow to this particular control. It is the x3 which is flowing into this. Therefore I have mentioned x3. In some other case, you might require this information. But yeah, so that is our phi node between x1, which is coming from above, and x3, which is coming from inside the loop. So that is x4, which gets used here. And I13 is the one which is coming from, well, in this case, I3 is the one which is coming from here, and I1 is the one which is coming from here. Sorry. No, that is not the case. I13 is the one which is coming from this phi node, because as the condition is false, you have I13 here. So that I13 directly gets used in this particular instruction. Right? So any questions on this part? Okay, so good that people have understood. In case there is any confusion, let me know. I can go over it again in the next class. So we'll stop here and see you on Friday.